Welcome to the Recaps channel. In today's video, we'll recap The Martian. Let's get started. In 2035, the Ares 3 mission crew is exploring Acidalia Planitia on Mars on the 18th day of their 31-day expedition. Suddenly, Johanssen receives a storm warning that threatens to topple their Mars Ascent Vehicle or MAV. Upon seeing the weather update, Commander Lewis orders the mission to be aborted, and they prepare for an emergency evacuation. The crew faces great difficulty due to the fierce storm and strong winds. Unfortunately, astronaut Mark Watney is struck by a large piece of debris, damaging his communication system and separating him from the rest of the crew. The crew loses all communication with Mark, making it impossible to locate him. Lewis searches for Mark but eventually decides to leave him behind, ordering Martinez, the ship's captain, to launch if conditions worsen. Since the telemetry from Mark's suit cannot be detected, he is presumed dead. The remaining crew members take off in the MAV and head towards their orbiting vessel, the Hermes. Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Teddy Sanders, the NASA director, holds a press conference to inform the public about the Ares 3 mission and declares Mark as deceased. On Mars, the storm subsides, and Mark regains consciousness, discovering a metal rod lodged in his abdomen and a critically low oxygen warning. He hurries to the crew's habitat or HAB to treat his wound. With great difficulty, Mark removes the metal rod from his body. He then starts recording a video diary in the HAB journal as a record, aware that he might not survive. Since he cannot communicate with Earth, his only hope of rescue is the next planned NASA mission scheduled for 4 years later. He becomes concerned about running out of food and begins rationing. As the HAB was designed for 6 people, it contains enough food for that number. Mark realizes he can survive for nearly 400 days on Mars. To extend his food supply, he decides to grow food on the planet, leveraging his botany expertise. Days pass, and Mark builds a garden inside the HAB, using Martian soil and fertilizing it with the crew's bio-waste. He cultivates potatoes but realizes that the garden requires a significant amount of water. Mark devises a way to produce water from unused rocket fuel by combining hydrogen and oxygen and burning them. However, he forgets to account for the excess oxygen he exhales, resulting in an explosion. He learns from his mistake, adjusts the process, and successfully produces water. Meanwhile, on Earth, Teddy holds a funeral to honor Mark's legacy. At the Johnson Space Center, Vincent Kapoor, the director of Mars missions, insists on bringing Mark's body back to Earth, arguing that it would garner more support from Congress. But Teddy wants to focus on Ares 4 supply missions targeting the Schiaparelli crater. In NASA's Mission Control Center, satellite planner Mindy Park reviews satellite images and notices moved equipment in the Acidalia Planitia region. She contacts Vincent, and Teddy decides to keep the information hidden from the Ares 3 crew on the Hermes, wanting them to stay focused on their mission. Eventually, the news about Mark's survival is released to the public, leading Teddy to address Mark's well-being and rescue mission. Meanwhile, on Mars, Mark begins studying the Ares 4 mission, which will land 3,200 kilometers away from his current location. Mark modifies the rover to double its battery life by salvaging parts from another rover. With sufficient food supplies, he embarks on the journey to reach the Ares 4 MAV site. During the journey, Mark faces significant challenges in surviving the intensifying cold. Despite initially resisting, he eventually turns on the heater to preserve his rover's battery life. To solve the heating problem more effectively, Mark retrieves the radioisotope thermoelectric generator or RTG that his crew had buried upon their arrival. RTGs are hazardous if ruptured. But with no other choice, Mark digs it up and carries it with him in the rover to keep warm. Back on Earth, Vincent explains that Mark is preparing to reach the Ares 4 MAV site for future contact. Teddy tasks Mindy with providing him information about Mark's journey and instructs Bruce, the director of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, to be ready within 3 months for Mark. Mitch Henderson, the Hermes flight director, believes that the Ares 3 crewmates deserve to know that Mark is alive, but Teddy insists on informing them only when a genuine rescue operation is planned. On Mars, Mark returns to the HAB and sees his healthy potato plants thriving. While examining the Acidalia Planitia map, Mark has an epiphany to retrieve the JPL Pathfinder probe, which had gone silent in 1997 due to battery failure. Vincent, tracking Mark's location, understands his plan and quickly flies to JPL from California. Mark successfully digs up the Pathfinder and brings it to the HAB to recharge it. Meanwhile, Vincent locates the Pathfinder at JPL and positions it to establish a connection with Mark's Pathfinder. Using the Pathfinder's camera, Mark establishes visual contact with NASA. Initially, they engage in complex conversations using a still-frame camera. Later, NASA sends a software patch to link Mark's rover with the Pathfinder, enabling easier communication through text. Vincent informs Mark that NASA is actively working on a rescue operation. Mark asks about his crewmates and becomes angry upon discovering that they were kept in the dark about his survival. Teddy then finally permits Mitch to inform the Ares 3 crewmates about Mark's situation. Mitch emphasizes that they are not to blame for leaving Mark behind. However, Commander Lewis feels a sense of responsibility for the incident. Days continue to pass, and Mark maintains communication with NASA. Suddenly, a tragedy strikes when an explosion damages the airlock of the HAB, causing a breach in Mark's spacesuit and exposing him to critically low levels of oxygen. Mark manages to restore the pressure in his suit, but he is devastated to find all his potato plants dead due to the harsh Martian atmosphere. NASA learns about the incident and instructs Bruce to prepare a space probe as quickly as possible to deliver food supplies to Mark, ensuring his survival until Ares 4 arrives. Finally, the Hermes crew is given permission to communicate with Mark. Later, he removes all the dead crops from the HAB and rebuilds the door to restore pressure and oxygen levels. Mark worries that there won't be enough for him to survive until Ares 4 arrives. Teddy orders the routine safety inspections of the space probe to be skipped to save time. After 4 weeks, Bruce completes the space probe called Iris. However, as the untested Iris lifts off, it explodes immediately, leaving Mark feeling hopeless. Meanwhile, the China National Space Administration or CNSA reveals their secret booster, capable of providing enough fuel for a Mars injection orbit. The CNSA's president expresses a desire to help NASA. After being informed about this, NASA's JPL astrodynamics expert, Rich Purnell, comes up with the idea of using the CNSA's booster to rendezvous with the Hermes, which would then use Earth's gravity for a slingshot effect, saving 2 years of travel time compared to Ares 4. Rich presents his idea to Teddy, who rejects it, believing that the lives of the 5 astronauts should not be risked solely to resupply Mark. Mitch secretly sends Rich's plans to the Hermes crew. Initially hesitant due to NASA's rejection, Lewis and the entire crew vote unanimously to implement the plan without NASA's approval. Johanssen disables NASA's remote controls and sends them a vague message mentioning Rich Purnell's name. With the Hermes out of their control, Teddy has no choice but to publicly support their decision. He realizes that Mitch orchestrated the situation and asks him to resign after the mission is over. Teddy then travels to China with Mitch to meet the CNSA's president. Meanwhile, Mark starts preparing for his 90-day journey to the Schiaparelli crater, where the Ares 4 MAV is located. On the other hand, the Hermes crew informs their families that their mission will be extended for an additional 533 days. 7 months later, the CNSA's booster launches and meets with the Hermes. Meanwhile, Mark prepares to leave for the Schiaparelli crater, where he will commandeer the Ares 4 lander. Bruce informs Mitch and Vincent that the weight of the Ares 4 MAV must be reduced to pass Mars orbit. Meanwhile, Mark reaches the Ares 4 MAV and begins removing unnecessary parts as instructed by NASA. On the Hermes, Lewis assigns the crewmates their roles in Mark's rescue mission. Back on Earth, people await to see if the mission to retrieve Mark will succeed. Mark prepares to leave Mars just 2 minutes before the remote-controlled MAV launch by Martinez. Mark and the NASA team anxiously watch as the MAV launches, but the canvas covering it ruptures, affecting its velocity. Mark passes out, and Lewis is unable to reach him. After some time, Mark regains consciousness. Lewis informs Mark that the MAV's velocity is still lower than that of the Hermes. Mark suggests making a breach in his pressure suit to use the atmospheric thrust to propel himself to the Hermes. Lewis initially refuses, but she gets an idea to use a bomb to breach the airlock, causing air to escape and create atmospheric thrust, slowing down the Hermes. Vogel is tasked with preparing the explosive, and Beck sets it on the airlock. Lewis takes it upon herself to rescue Mark since she can't risk sending everyone else and endangering their lives. The airlock is blown, reducing the velocity, but it's still not enough for Lewis to reach Mark. With no other option, Mark creates a hole in his pressure suit and, with great difficulty, propels himself towards Lewis. Finally, Lewis informs the command center that Mark has been successfully rescued. Mark returns to Earth and becomes a survival instructor for future astronauts. 5 years later, as the Ares V launch approaches, the individuals involved in Mark's rescue are shown in their current lives. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share if you enjoyed the video. See you again here on the Recaps channel.